welcome to Be My Guest with me, Mary Honan, on Lir Media TV, supporting the Samaritans, Limerick and Tipperary. And I hope you'll indulge me now while I read this segment here, and it's from Revolutionary Threads, the mediation of gender and political identity in the new Irish dancing costume, 1917 to 1937, by Sarah Churchill. Annie Philpott was a young woman when the British placed her native Cork under martial law, burned the city, shot her boyfriend for breaking curfew, and murdered the Lord Mayor. But she would not be intimidated. Philpott was a proud Irish woman, member of Cumann na mBan and an Irish dancer. In the days of her youth, Irish dancers led by the Cork Volunteers Pipe Band would assemble in full costume and tricolours at North Monastery and parade through the city to the suburbs, wherever the dancing competition or festival was being held. The burning of Patrick Street would not stop this display, a defiant protest of the brutality and indignity of martial law and centuries of colonial misrule. It was an extreme expression of Irish national identity at a time when that identity was not safe to articulate. Philpott's recollection illustrates a hidden history of protest, politics, and display in the Irish dancing body. It reveals that Irish dancing expressed, at least in some instances, a political identity, and that the very act of wearing a dancing costume could be, at times, both dangerous and defiant. But of course, that's a photograph of Annie Philpott behind me, and she was much more than a revolutionary, more than a nationalist, more than an Irish dancer. She was a daughter, she was a mother, she was a wife, and one of her children, I'm proud to say, is here with me today, and I'm even more proud to say I know him, and he's one of my favourite people in Irish dancing, and he knows that. And it's Dr. John Cullinane from Cork. Welcome, John.
Thank you indeed, Mary. Thank you for having me.
It's my privilege, utter privilege. I'll tell you, I'm nervous of this interview more than any of them because of your knowledge. John, tell me a little bit about your mother, Annie, and her love of Irish dancing, and her love of Ireland.
My mother, Annie Philpott, was born around 1902, and she grew up in her very teenage years, very troubled times. We actually, this week, we commemorate the 100th anniversary of the hunger strike in Cork. So, yeah, back 100 years now to the dancing. It was very turbulent, as you gathered from the introduction that you read out. She lived at the top of High Street in Cork City, and she learned her dancing in a little village called the Back Douglas village. Now it's all part of the city. And she learned there from Monty Reardon. And then she came from a good nationalist family. Her brother played the pipes. He was in the Volunteer Pipers Band. And you read about the start of the Feshes. They paraded through the city centre. Well, she was a young dancer, and her sister Lizzie, and they were in the dance group that paraded behind the pipe band. Now, if you go back to those times, the British, my mother, just a little anecdote, my mother's boyfriend was actually shot dead leaving her house one Sunday afternoon. He went in the railway line because the Black and Tans were on the rampage, and he was shot dead on the railway line for his crime. There was curfew at 6 o'clock, and he was a young, hot-blooded male. He wasn't my father's, it turns out. He was visiting my mother. they lived under those dreadful extremes. My Uncle Tom then, he played the bagpipes in the Volunteer Pipers Band, and they used to hide the pipes in the house where they lived. A tiny small house and a big family, and several of them in the bed, as was the norm, and trying to hide the bagpipes when the Black and Tans raided their houses. And if you ever tried hiding a set of bagpipes in a bed with about 3 or 4 children, that was risking.
My mum's cousins were Bill and Andy Keane, and their photographs used to be in Kishton in Limerick. They were All-Ireland champion uilleann pipers. They were taught by Leo Rosen.
Oh.
And so I understand about the bagpipes and the difficulty of hiding them, least of all under pressure.
And another kind of anecdote my aunt and my mother told me was one Sunday they had a feis in Glasheen. Now Glasheen is just a suburb, it's just where the regional hospital is in Cork. And that was green country. And they had a feis there. And they had the usual, they all assembled at the North Monastery.
Yeah.
With the pipe band and all the dancers. And then they paraded down through Patrick Street. Now this is the Patrick Street that the Black and Tans actually burned one side of it. And they burned the City Hall as well. So it was like tread upon eggshells. And it was coat-trailing, defiant to the British occupational forces. They got out to the feis in Glasheen, and the Black and Tans duly raided the feis. This was not uncommon. I've given Sarah a few examples of this. The Black and Tans would come out and raid the feis. So the feis in its early age was an extreme expression of Irish identity, Irish nationalism, very politically charged and so on. And the Black and Tans put all the dancers in their costume up against the wall and frisked them all. Now, my mother and my Auntie Liz, they were only young girls at the time, but they frisked them all. But there was a little side issue to this. One of the women that they frisked was older than them. She was known as Doty Cogan. She was, in fact, Mr. O'Keefe, Cormac O'Keefe, very famous dance master. Yeah. She was his girlfriend, or whatever she was at the time. And the Black and Tans had her up against the wall and they frisked her, and she turned around with a handbag and she hit them. And she said, there'll be no man put his hands on me except Mr. O'Keefe. That was all their lives were in danger. And she turned around. And after that, she became known like, with you daren't take her on. She beat the Black and Tans, kind of, you know.
Yeah, so, right across the road from me, there's bullet holes still on the graveyard wall, where a friend of my mum's, her uncle was shot dead, and the bullet hole is still on the wall. Right, I can see it from my window. The graveyard is right outside. I can see the graveyard, and the bullet hole is on the wall from the Black and Tans.
Yeah. Now you have 2 lovely photographs.
I have.
And I'll give you a little talk about this little young fellow with the cudgel.
Gorgeous.
Hand. He was
Ambrose Brunton.
To Brendan O'Dowd, the very famous Percy French singer, for lack of a way of putting it.
Olive Boyle O'Dowda's husband.
Yes. She married him. And that was one of his relatives in the 1890s. And from it you can see, we didn't have, you see, we were troubled all the time. We didn't have an acceptable Irish dancing costume. And this costume that he's portraying there, lovely in its own way, but that was a bit stage Irish. In other words, the English cartoons, Punch and all of these.
Yeah, very Punch-like.
And they said this is the Irish with their cudgels and their pigs in the parlour. And yet it was a lovely kind of Irish costume, the knee breeches. And the men in Cork, up to Cormac O'Keefe's time, they danced in knee breeches. Cormac O'Keefe or any of those teachers, they never wore kilts. The kilts were introduced later on in the 1930s.
And women wore the kilts as well.
Sorry?
Women wore the kilts as well.
Yes, yeah. The other lady on the other side is
a beautiful photograph, John.
Yeah, is Maura Tracy. Now she is the mother of Maura Tracy Barron, who was the secretary of in the office, the commission office.
Yeah, Maura Tracy.
When we first got an office, and she was the person in charge, the executive.
Is that Maura's mother?
That is Maura's mother.
Oh, I just have to share that with Maura because it's just she's on Facebook as well with me, and I stayed in her home, and it's just a beautiful photograph. I don't know what it is about it. I just thought that was an absolutely beautiful photograph.
Yeah, I have three photographs of her at different ages showing the progression. But if you look at her, this costume, the face is beautiful. It smiles at you. But she is wearing markers that identify it as an Irish dancing costume. She is wearing a shawl as part of the costume, and that was adapted by the Gaelic League for their early costumes as an Irish identity. And she's wearing a Tara brooch on the shawl.
I love the Tara.
Yeah. And she is wearing a little bonnet, possibly with a feather on it. That was typical at some times. And then the coatee and the dress was popular. Lily Comerford in Dublin introduced that as a dancing costume.
And she was wearing her medals. That was very, very prominent then.
Yes.
They must have rattled around the floor, John.
Well, you see, they were worn only for photographs. There's a horrible photograph of me, the one I hate most. I'm covered in medals. And she was my teacher, Tommy Cullen. He wanted me to display on my medals, and I cringed. And my publisher printed it in this book. But I hasten to add that the medals were only worn for exhibition and for getting your photograph taken. And if you look at hers, the medals are on a little apron.
A little apron.
The apron was only tied around the waist when getting a photograph taken. You did not dance with your medals on you.
That photograph up there at the very top, John, that one. It's
yes.
One of the oldest on record, the oldest kilts and the oldest forms of dancing kilt, isn't it?
Yes.
That he wore.
The one below it of the little girl.
Little girl, yeah.
Down here. That's an interesting one. She is the oldest one that I can find wearing a kilt.
Liddy Curran.
She ended up in New Zealand, and I got that photograph as a little box camera, tiny photograph with the surface cracked and everything. And the remedial clinic in Dublin reconstructed the photograph and showed me that she has a little lace cuff on her uniform, and that is one of the earliest that I can say that is truly, it has markers, that I call them, that identifies it as being Irish. She has the lace collar.
Collar and the cuffs.
She has the shawl attached to one shoulder and draped down. Now, in the early years, the shawls were long, because the dancing wasn't as cumbersome as it is today, you know. So they wore a long shawl down even to the end of the dress. And she has a Tara brooch on her shoulder. And she has the kilt, in other words, a pleated skirt.
Yeah.
She has markers that identify it as an Irish dancing costume.
And that is Padder O'Rafferty.
Yeah.
In the oldest record of a kilt.
Yes. That photograph, and the girl with the Morris Stoker, she is in a typical Irish costume at the period. But his costume is very interesting because he's wearing a kilt. Also, he is wearing around the neck, he's wearing what I would call a ruff, a lace kind of ruff. Okay. And he has the Tara brooch and he has the shawl. The ruff would possibly suggest more the Scottish influence, and he was north of Ireland, where the Scottish and Irish cultures blended together. Yeah. So that is a very interesting photograph.
And you're beside him with your sister in that photograph, wearing your medals.
May I say, I want to pay tribute to my sister, who's at times not too well, but Sis was also a qualified teacher and a S.D.C.R.G, and not practicing now for a number of years. She started dancing with Tommy Cullen in Cork, he thought, in Ongrianon, which was the Gaelic League premises in Father Matthew Street. And she went to join the dancing class, and I was sent down some days to collect her, and I was very interested in what was happening. And I asked to join the dancing class, kind of unusual for boys, kind of, you know. And I joined it, and Sis and myself were very proud of our record. In contrast to where the dancing goes today, we learned from Tommy Cullen. He was elderly at the time, and we had only the one teacher. Up to the day I finished, and I had my Ph.D. and I got my S.D.C.R.G and everything, I never learned from any other teacher, only Tommy Cullen. Now, the costumes were, as was the practice at the time, they were handmade by my mother. Like, we didn't have all the money for embroidery and all of that. That, by the way,
that's that's our I should say, Una O'Rourke there, and then you have Anya Nihuhig.
Yeah.
There, my teacher and her mother, Una O'Rourke, I should say.
And you can see they, unlike Sis, my sister, there was no embroidery on her costume. That was about late 1940s.
Yeah.
Una O'Rourke then has a little bit of embroidery here in the neck, in the V. And she is wearing the famous Thomond belt.
Yes.
And when you come to Anya, her daughter was the winner of the Thomond belt, and she has a bit more embroidery, and she has a flared skirt to her dress, and it is embroidered right around the bottom of the dress. The other thing, if you want to...
Can you explain briefly to me, John, before I move on to photographs, what about the medal?
The medal was a Talton's Game medal. The Talton Games were held 3 times in Ireland, 1924, 28 and 32. Mm-hmm. And the best way to kind of describe them was they were a kind of a mini Olympics.
Yeah.
It was an
Olympic medal.
Ireland, the British only withdrew in 1920 or that, and 1924, the Irish government set up this big festival of competitions of all sorts, dancing, culture, music, sports, athletics, everything.
Why did they do away with it? Why is that not still going?
Well, it was held in 1924, 28 and 32. And the 32 one was not financially successful. By the way, the 1924 or 28, to mark the opening it, they had planes flew down O'Connell Street. Now this is, we were only saying goodbye to the British at the boats to send them back. And they were celebrating to this extent. It was wonderful foresight of these people. Now, the medal, they struck a medal. It's really a medallion. Yeah, it is Queen Maeve Umbaurian, and she was the patron of the Talton Games, because in her time, a couple of 100 years ago, before that, she held her games and presided over those. So that is the image. Now, the medals were the same, whether you won it for dancing or for the long putt or the 500-yard sprint or the swimming. And there was a first, second, and third, gold, silver, bronze. And one of the people who was very, very proud of having her Talton Games medal, the original Talton Games, was, you would have remembered, May Butler in Canada.
I heard of her.
She taught there, and her daughter. And she had that medal at home, but she, her children played with them, as she said, and she didn't realize the significance of them. And I was talking to her then, and she had it made into a brooch.
Yeah.
And her daughter then wore it every time she was at an Oireachtas in All Ireland or a World. So there was a new appreciation of this Talton Games medallion.
Would you have a look at these, John? Look at this display of silverware.
Yes.
I think the one in the center is spectacular.
Yeah.
With now almost like it's a berry. It's on their head. It's on her head.
Yeah.
It's just amazing.
I'll tell you, the lad on the right, I don't have very much information at all about him. It was a Dublin photograph, and just to say that he's wearing, obviously, all of his medals, but they're on an apron over trousers.
Yeah.
Now, when you come to the centre, that was Patricia Lathlane, was her maiden name.
That's right, yeah.
She's well known to all of us in Australia. She is Trish Williams. Williams is her married name.
But Deborah Mulvenna came out with the berry lately. In the last few years, her solo dancers started to wear this berry with a feather. And you can see where Deborah, being an artist as well, would have got her influence, from photographs like that and from that era. It's absolutely wonderful. The minute I saw that, I thought of Deborah Mulvenna.
Yeah, there was a period back in the time of that photograph when the berries and the feathers were quite popular.
Yeah.
And that was popular at times in Ireland. And if you look at Brenda Springer's costume, that was a guest of yours.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she learned from a Miss Nugent in Mallow, was her teacher, and that is Fesh Matthew Junior Championship. Now, again, she's wearing her medals. She's wearing a lace ruff and then the berry and the feather and the lace collars. That was Miss Nugent's class
Signature.
Yeah. But in Australia, they wore the berries were very, very popular, the berries and the feather. By the way, we had many a good laugh with Brenda, and we out Kilcorny and Cullen Fish in the fields and chasing the turkeys, and the fish was a kind of a display of agricultural stuff, and we'd be over the ditches and everywhere, and then the competition would start, and Brenda would be looking for her feathers and her berry, and she was many of the times she went up with the turkey feathers sticking out of her costume, because we enjoyed ourselves in those days. The fish was so rare, and it was a great day out.
Of you and Brenda together as a two-hand.
Yes, I'm wearing the Thomond belt there. In the other, with my sister, I'm wearing the Cork All-Ireland Challenge belt, which is the oldest belt in history. Now, the belt I'm wearing there is the fantastic, incredible, to me, it's the greatest trophy in existence. Anya and her mother were wearing it, as you saw. And I'm wearing it there in 62, 63.
And what about the one above me here?
That photograph was taken when we were going to dance in Brussels. And we danced, I know that I danced at the opening of the Atomium in Brussels, and we performed all over the continent in 1960, in Germany and Holland and so on and so forth. And this photograph of me on my own, I'm holding the Russell Cup, and I'm wearing the Thomond belt. The Russell Cup and Thomond belt were both competed for at Phelan-Nimney, which was one of the greatest.
Wasn't it? You'd have to book your tickets for the Munster belt.
Yes.
Every year, and it's just and go to it. And my cousin Brendan and Adrian danced in it, and
yes.
Every year, and you'd book your seats, and you'd be in awe of the dancers because they were all older, and
yeah,
it was fabulous. But that's your teacher beside you.
That is my teacher, Tommy Cullen. And recently I got a photograph sent by his nephew. I met him at the embassy in London when we had the reception, and he sent me a photograph, and it is of Tommy Cullen, my teacher, his brother Willie, and their nephew, who was nearly as old as them, living in London. 3 men at Kilcorny Fish, and they all adult men competing in the solo competition at Kilcorny. And it is very unusual, like you may get the odd solo male dancer, but 3 adult males. They were not young, they were certainly in their mid-20s competing at Kilcorny. So.
But I mean, it's just amazing. And on the far right, you have Tommaso Farrelly, and another absolute and utter gentleman of Irish dancing, performing there.
Yes, that was Tom, and he was dancing on the radio. We associate dancing on the radio with Dinjo and Rory O'Connor.
Rory O'Connor was the first to dance.
And he was a legend. Well, that kind of is debatable. Tomas has a photograph there of himself. And there's the microphone down the ground, picking him up, and he dancing on the radio.
Isn't it amazing? It's just simply amazing. The what do you think of the way the costumes have gone now compared to what they were, John? Do you ache for the past, or do you like the way they've gone now?
Well, I'm in two minds about the way they've gone. First of all, the dancing has progressed. It is no longer an expression of Irish national identity, trying to get rid of the Brits, de-Anglicizing Ireland. It now has, another string to its bow. It is an art form, an incredible art form.
It
The
is.
intricacies of the footwork. These people all over the world are performing it now. And I was one on the commission in the 60s when we spread the exams and we took them abroad and set up the world and invited these people in. So everyone now has a say in the style of the dancing, the movements, etc., etc. I wouldn't agree with all of them, but the costumes no longer reflect an Irish national identity. They're no longer worn going down Patrick Street, setting the city on fire. It's worn for a different reason now.
They still exude a sense of pride for even though there is no reference whatsoever in them. There's no tara brooch, there's no shawl, there's no embroidery, there's no but still children who wear them feel a sense of pride to be Irish.
I don't know that they do, Mary, because some of them come up in a costume, and the costume now goes with the evolution in the dance content itself.
Yeah.
Like in the 70s, 80s, 90s, we had costumes that were stiffened with layers and inverted pleats and oververted pleats. There was about 3 layers to the dress and they were down to the knees and they were heavily embroidered.
They were. They were.
Those costumes would not suit the style, the dancing, the movements they're doing today.
No.
Everything is the minute the music starts, 1, 2, 3, psh,
and they're off.
They're off to the corner, psh, to the next corner. And if there's one in the next corner, shove her out of the way or let her be known that you're coming. So the costumes now reflect what we are doing. They're not Irish. Some of them have bonnets and a veil down the side that when I see them coming, I feel like saying, I'll take the chicken or the steak if you have it, please, because I think I'm on board an Etihad airline. They're more like stewardesses from Emirates and Etihad and so on, what they're wearing on their head. And they have flowers out of it, short of putting a rose across their face.
But we were talking the other day about that, and some, Carol Scanlon, that the costumes are beautiful and the children are done up beautiful, but sometimes some parents just could do with maybe living with the adage, less is more. You could just go a little bit less, or you could, in some cases, a little bit more, just that little bit more, but knowing when to stop is the important thing, I suppose. That's a photograph of Betty Kelly.
Betty Kelly. Now, she was a wonderful, wonderful person. She was Irish originally. She
Funny woman.
Her life in Manchester. As far as I know, she didn't have a family or marriage herself. She reared so many children herself. She dedicated her life to rearing children and to promoting Irish dancing at a time when it wasn't popular to be Irish in England. And she was in Manchester. I remember judging feshes with her. You could write books on the stories about.
I believe she used to play the accordion, take the money and judge the fesh.
yeah. No, she
Danny
played.
Doherty said she used to tell the judge or whoever, with the makeshift judge, whoever was there, give it to her, give it to her. It was only potluck which child came out with a prize.
She actually played the violin, and
The
she
violin.
had the play and the violin and the bow, and she tapped. The bow was the instructor for the next three to come on. She had it down to fine art. And she had somebody sitting next to her, sometimes not adjudicating or whatever, and she'd tell him the mark to put down for the such a.
That's what Danny said.
Yes.
Danny Doherty. He said she'd poke the child on to tell them it's your turn, and she'd tell the judge, "That's who you give it to."
Yeah, she was, but she was really a wonderful, sincere, genuinely sincere person. She lived in England, but she died in her heart in Ireland and lived all her life kind of in Ireland, cocooned in England. Kind of.
Yeah. It's a sad way to be. I've said it before. My own mother loved England, loved English people, but just couldn't live in England. Ached for Ireland until she came home. The foundation.
Going back, first of all, in the Gaelic League was founded in 1893. And at the time it was founded, one of the reasons it was set up was that there was a very serious decline in the number of Irish speakers.
Yes.
And so the Gaelic League was established, and it had as its primary objective, very much so, the language and the literature. The dancing really, you can go to any of its mandates in its foundation. The dancing was not really on its agenda. It was down there. But it's an ill wind or a rising tide rises all boats. So they set up the Conra. Then they set up an Oireachtas in Dublin in 97. All these dates are very close. For competitions. Again, it was nearly a week long of literature, storytelling, and poetry and everything in Irish. And there were 2 dancing competitions, just a little sop to it. But again, if it wasn't for those 2 dancing competitions, we might never be where we are today, you know? So the dancing was raised, that boat did start to float. By the way, one of the earlier winners of the Oireachtas, as they called it, the Gaelic League Oireachtas, the dancing competition, was Joe Halpin from Limerick.
Yeah.
And Joe then was on the first commission. They were interested in organising all the feises, and the Gaelic League in the early decades, in Dublin at least, they organised the feises. The teachers then supplied the pupils. But it is a true saying that the Gaelic League were interested in using the dancing and the dancing competitors as fodder to promote the Irish language.
Yeah.
It was compulsory that you gave your name, and sometimes it was compulsory that you were tested at the side of the stage in Irish. So you come along then, they were running the Oireachtas in Dublin, etc. In the meantime, at an early stage, the Cork teachers did not come under the control of the Gaelic League. They came from the travelling dancing masters, who did not exist in Dublin, because that Dublin was the city, and the travelling dancing masters only existed in Munster and in the rural parts of Munster. So
Munster, they were all men. The
Nearly,
traveling man.
oh yes, yeah, almost exclusively men, because traveling around from village to village was not acceptable
For a woman.
vocation for a woman. Even to lift her skirt for to dance kind of was not acceptable. It was the social norms at the time.
And certainly not under De Valera and the dancing at the crossroads. There were no women lifting their skirts.
Well, I talked to De Valera and I had interviews with him and his wife Sinead on where he learned his dancing. But getting back to this, so Cork had set up its own association in 1895, Cork Dance Teachers Association. And the commission then, in Dublin then, 1924, the Dublin teachers set up an association. And then in Dublin in 1924, the Teachers Association and the Commission got together and they set up a control board to control the Irish dancing. The teachers were supplying the pupils, etc., etc. The Commission was supplying, actually organising the feshes and the control of the feshes and the Irish thing. And the registration of who was a teacher and so on. But instead of letting that control board, it seemed to work very well.
Yeah.
Equal representation. I emphasize the word equal representation from the teachers and the commission. But lo and behold, the Gaelic League at an Ordesh had a motion that they were going to take over the dancing. And around 1929, they set up an independent commission. They didn't tell the control board. They broke from the control board and let the teachers adrift, and they set up their own organization. It had a few different names first, Commission Rink and so on and so forth. And finally settling on Commission de Rinky Gaelica. But they took over the dancing, and the control board fell by the way then. The Teachers Association continued in Dublin. The setup of the commission, and I am one of the most loyal people to C.L.R.G, but I am also a historian, and the setup of the commission was wrong from the start.
Yeah,
it was set up.
I agree. Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
And I am, by the way, in my archive, I have all the documents to back up all of this. It was set up to promote Irish dancing around 1929-30. And to promote Irish dancing, they had 3 Gaelic League people from Munster, 3 Gaelic League people from Connacht, 3 Gaelic League people from Ulster, 3 Gaelic League from Leinster, and 6 from the the Standing Committee of the Gaelic League. They had 3 musicians, and guess what? They actually invited 2 or 3 teachers onto it for a body that was supposed to control Irish dancing. And some of those that they had on included Joe Halpin, but he was there and his daughter Trassa. They were teachers, but they were Gaelic League people. So the dancing teachers got no say. And then all the business was run through Irish. By the way, up to the 1960s, when I first attended, I was on the commission since the 60s, over 50, 60 years now. And the meetings were conducted wholly and entirely through Irish. So
when my mother was fluent, she learned her, and she had the Fáine with the Gaelic League, but then they had the county and the city, our suburb moved. So when she was in the city, or the county, she ended up in the city, and there was a falling out between the Gaelic League in the county and the Gaelic League in the city, and she never got her gold Fáine. But when I went up to do my AD, oh Mother of God, John, Orla wrote 3 pages out about me. And the poor man just got to ask me my name, and for 20 minutes that I was in there, I didn't stop talking. In case he'd ask me another question, I had it all learned off by heart. I'm not fluent, and I wish I was. It's the most beautiful language.
Yeah, I must say that in recent years in the commission, there is a new appreciation of the language on a voluntary basis, and that is the thing. When the words were set up, by the way, everything was announced in Irish. When the Munster Championships were set up, and I was on the Munster Championships in 1968, and I did announcing at the first World Championships. Only Eamon de Waal and myself are the only 2 left that announced at the World Championships. All the other officers are dead. But it was entirely through Irish.
And some of these photographs behind, you have Mairead O'Flaherty. I don't know where my hand is going. Mairead O'Flaherty is behind me.
She's on your left-hand side, yeah.
On my left-hand side, my right, as I'm looking at it. Tomás O'Farrelly, and Tomás O'Farrelly on this side here.
Yeah, and Ailey Simpson next to him, yeah.
Ailey Shadalig. And then you have Seamus McAnulla above.
Yeah.
And Matty Milady behind me.
Yeah.
And people that I love Seamus McAnulla and Tomás O'Farrelly, just 2 lovely men.
Sorry, the lady up in the corner is June Butler.
Yes, June Butler.
On your right-hand top, yeah. And she is wearing her mother's Talton Games medallion.
Yes, I saw the Talton Games medal on her.
Yeah, yeah. So those people, most of them were Gaelic League. Mairead was a great friend of mine all my life. She was a roaring
great stalwart for Irish dancing in Connacht.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. A wonderful person, a wonderful teacher, and you could tell the stories until the cows come home. I went to America a few years. We were going to the Nationals and all of that, and I travelled over with Mairead. I could write books and books on that episode.
I bet you could. I'd say she was a character. I was very young when, but I remember Mairead judging, and you remember certain judges, like I remember Brendan de Glynn. I loved Brendan. I remember winning a trophy at the Nanonagel Fesh in Cork, and John Cullinane had the trophy locked into the boot of his car. And to this day, I've never forgotten the fact that I was given a trophy and told, you can have that trophy, and we'll send you your trophy in the it was posted or something to me, but I can always remember being told, John has it and it's locked into the boot of his car.
Yeah, I was the founder of both Féile Fiambara and Nanonagel in Cork, because in those days we only had Feshmatchu Cork and Féile Limni in Limerick, and really, and then the little country feshes on the back of a lorry. There was nothing kind of really in between.
But John, what do Niall O'Leary brought up a question and it's an interesting question about the whole area on Facebook of open platform Feshna, and you seem to be the perfect man because you were there through the split with Kogol, and now subsequently there's CRN and WIDA and all these other organizations. What do you think of the idea of open platforms?
Well, I don't know where you would begin, because all the organizations now at this stage have become too big and too unwieldy. Could you possibly imagine setting up a world with Ouida
That's my reservation. It
and
would.
everything.
Danny Doherty would be delighted. Look at all the medals and trophies he'd sell. But other than that, it would go on for about 3 weeks.
Wait a while now. The Chinese would be delighted because they're manufacturing most of our medals now. Let's be honest with it. Nearly all the medals now come from China. But
China.
it, organization-wise, the structure of it, it's too late now. You know, I was there when the split occurred, and I go back and talked about the kernel of what was behind the split, really, to you earlier on. I talked about the commission, C.L.R.G, was closed shop, meetings held in Irish, little or no teacher representation on it. And meanwhile, they were conducting exams and qualifying people. And so the number of qualified professional teachers was increasing. And those teachers then set up their own association, mostly in Dublin. And then we were asked to join them in Cork. So we sent off for a few bob. And in all fairness to those teachers, the Teachers Association in Dublin, they held an annual convention. And their teachers were all invited. One famous one was in Gormanston, to come to discuss, to teach such a thing.
And why is that not done in today, John, where you have a national convention every year? Isn't that fundamental? You know, that we should have. That, you know, that there should be a convention where teachers can come and air their views in a public, if you like, public-private forum of all teachers. Even now that we have the power of Zoom, it could be done all over the world without people leaving their homes or their countries. And people, you'd feel you had proper representation when you could voice your opinion.
Yeah. So year after year in the 60s, the Teachers Association in Dublin held its convention, and it was getting more powerful, stronger, and the commission really didn't see the nettle coming. Then in the 1960s, by the way, they set up a constitution for this convention, and they set up a name. And it was called An Comhdháil in the 60s, in the middle 60s. And we were all part of it. All the O'Rourke's in Limerick, the Nolans, the John Cullinans in Cork, we had a dual citizenship like they have in America.
Okay.
We were teachers in our association, and we went to our convention, and we did our exam and our registration with the commission. But the Teachers Association was getting stronger, and eventually in 70s, the straw that broke the camel's back, we were told that they were splitting from the commission. And we were told we were to resign our position with the commission. And then in 1970, now I loved the Teachers Association, I loved the conventions. We went there, we had workshops on lace making, we had workshops on the history, we had workshops on this and that. It's a
no-brainer, John. It's a no-brainer.
Yeah, and we stayed overnight in Gormanston College, you know, for 2 or 3 nights and so on. And there were conventions moved to everything. But 1970 then split. And that was the most dreadful thing, really. There was a meeting held in Dublin by the Comhdháil. And by the way, the idea that the Comhdháil only came into being in 1970 is wrong, totally inaccurate. I have all the documents over there on my left with the constitution of the Comhdháil in the 1967, and the name of it, everything. And we were all members of it. I have an agenda which there was motions proposed by Anya Tui at it. And now if you said Anya Tui Kogal, because...
Oh no, we're all staunch on commission, and
Yeah.
and as I said, I would never ever want to be anything other than on commission. I've never been anything other, but I do think that there should be representation at a global level for teachers to be able to have an annual convention where they can air their views.
Yeah,
I don't think there's anything wrong with thinking that is a.
I just want to say two points, and I hop back a bit. First of all, when the split came, it was the worst, dreadful thing you can imagine. Families, friends were divided. Limerick all stayed together. That was fine. Cork was split. Cormac O'Keefe, Peggy McTaggart, Molly Hassan, all of those, they went Kogal, and my sister, myself went commission. So you had split and the hatred that it developed. That was one thing. The other thing was, I must say, I remained commission because I didn't think a split would heal anything.
No.
But the thing is, all of the greatest teachers at the time, all the people who were my peers who examined me for my exams, etc., all of those really were Kogal. They went Kogal because they were the teachers, they were the examiners. And I have the greatest respect for those who went Kogal as teachers. The Anna McCoys and the Rory O'Connors, the Peter Boltons, the peers, such a thing. So they were the great teachers, and the commission was very devoid of teachers. And the result of that was, it's an ill wind that doesn't blow some bit of good. Some of us benefited from that because then after 1970, I did my adjudications in 70 because I was just the age then. Straight away, the commission didn't have many examiners left. All the great teachers, when I say all the great now, 99% of the great teachers were Kogal. And the commission then set up a few people and put us on exams as examiner. So the result was, by 1972, 2 years or something after I get my S.D.C.R.G, but this is because I was a Ph.D. and I was a lecturer and all that, I was made an examiner, you know? And I sat in on exams in Dublin. And then, lo and behold, 1974, I think, I was on an exam in San Francisco. Tony Nolan was another one. He was a professional dancing teacher, great standing. Nobody could question his credentials. He was made an examiner and sent to Australia, New Zealand with Marley Walsh about 1973. Molly Farley, she was made an examiner, and I think she was on an exam in Manchester about 1974. And I would say, and I don't wish to offend anybody, but if the split hadn't come about, we would not have been examiners, because all the other people there, they were the great Dianes. So that's...
I think the happy medium in all of this, John, would be, I think there'd be I think Commission is doing a fantastic job, and they're all voluntary. But I do think, in order for people to feel that they have a voice and that they can actually, that there should be a national convention, an international convention, I should say, where people can just zoom in at a certain time and give their views, or travel to the event. And I know every 2 years it could even be, biannually. Just that people would be able to voice their grievances if they had any.
Well, I think now that you have something like Zoom, it would be possible to do that. But actually, like the commission meeting itself, do you know how many people attend a commission meeting? Have a guess.
God only knows.
There's around 98 people attend every commission meeting. It's always over the 90, and I have yet to see it past the 100. It's in the 90. Now, can you tell me? I think de Gaulle said any nation that produces 120 different varieties of cheese is totally ungovernable. And I say that, I wouldn't say ungovernable, but I say it's bloody hard to control 98 delegates at a meeting.
Yeah.
And then even still, some places and some areas are saying, oh, we don't have any say. There's 98, between 90 and 100, I'm picking the number 98. 98 delegates come to a meeting.
I had a brain freeze there for a minute.
For a weekend in the Clayton Hotel for committees, subcommittees, and every country has representatives on those committees.
Then it could probably be split into countries. So you could have a meeting, one meeting for North America or the entire region of the US. You could have another region for UK. You could have one for Ireland.
But don't we have that in this respect? Don't the American teachers have their IDTNA convention?
They do, but I'm just thinking of having a convention where everybody can, have a voice, or at least write in something, either on a national or on an annual or biannual, so that people feel that they have. Because we were talking the other day, or who was I talking to? Gary Healy brought up questions on when I interviewed him. And I said, but why don't you voice, if you have grievances, voice your concerns? But he said, who do we voice them to, Mary? How do we voice them?
Yeah.
And I said, but, surely you should, bring these up to An Comisiún and suggest something on an annual basis where teachers can come together with An Comisiún, rather than having, say, separate voices.
The answer to that is that he has all his officers of his region where he lives are members of the commission and attend commission meetings. And they are there to voice the points on behalf of their members. Yeah. And I'm sure Gary Healy is very well aware of that. But tell me, how would you control a convention at which every teacher on commission, I don't know, 1,400, and every teacher in Cogal, 800, every teacher in Ouida, 600, yeah. Every teacher in...
So it's just an idea to try and break it up into, I suppose, have a convention, a US convention, or have an Irish convention, or where teachers...
They do have a
convention. They just have their voice.
They do have a convention. IDTNA
yeah.
has an annual convention, and every area has its representatives. In fact, I mentioned 98 representatives. There is a fair number of those. A very big number are from America.
Yeah.
There's
I thought you were the best person to actually bring all of that up to, because I said, John Cullinane has been there from the split, has been there entirely through the whole lot of it, is a historian of Irish dance.
Yeah.
And if anyone would know the ramifications of everything, it would be John.
Yeah, but be practical when you come up with a suggestion. It's all very well to say, I should have such a thing. can you invite every registered teacher of every organization to come together to a convention?
No, but I
You'd
suppose
have to
you
hire Croke Park.
in groups at different times. It's a logistical. I will give you. It turn out to be a logistical nightmare.
Yeah.
But it's just, I suppose, it was a thought, and it was just something I said I'd actually mention to you. But John, we're going to draw this particular interview to a close because there's so much I could ask you. And if you'll be so kind as to take part in more with me, and we can talk about the progression of Irish dance in the next one into North America or into Canada, into Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Britain, of course, and now Europe and all over the world, not least Israel and China and Japan and all these countries, these glorious Mexico.
And the answer to your previous point is we have evolved into all of these countries, and now the practicality of conventions becomes extremely difficult. So I leave it up to the brains like you who are.
Oh, God Almighty, John! I'm a historian, but not as nearly as exalted a historian as Dr. John Cullinane. Not even a blip on the John Cullinane speculometer.
By the way, I was on your S.D.C.R.G, your final one when you got it.
I know, and I just bow to your superior wisdom.
I was on Mary Lou's, Russell Beaton, S.D.C.R.G, and I was on the famous one. I enjoyed it. Michael Johnson telling us as the priest on the Saturday night in the middle of the exam, he set up Mass from the Ormond Hotel just down the road. I think it's the Franciscan Church.
Eugene Harnett.
And we all went to a side altar, and we had a private Mass said by Michael Johnson, and he's saying, bless, and he invoked in his prayers that God would direct us and guide us and send the examiners on their tough luck as such. And then election was taken up, much to Michael's embarrassment, and he was embarrassed. And when we got back to the hotel, there was an invitation. Michael was looking for us all in the bar that he was buying rounds of drink. So the money circulated around.
And he could get away with that because he was a priest.
Oh yeah, he was a lovely, lovely person.
Lovely gentleman, isn't he? Gentleman. I knew you'd like that interview, John.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Because he's an amazing man with a wealth of knowledge and practical talent behind him. But yeah. John, thank you so very much for being my guest, and we'll talk about the next chapter. And meanwhile, there's 3 of the books that John has written and that all these information come from, and I'll post them up larger, and we'll gradually get through all your books, John.
Okay, Mary. God bless.
God bless. Thank you. Gar Mila Mahagut.
Bye.
That's my Irish, you know.